Now is just go through a quick demo of how Automatra functions at a very basic level okay, so in this demo, what I'm going to do is demonstrate things from both a developer and also a deployer perspective, okay? So when I say that, first of all, we have code, okay? So developers work with code and they check in code. In this particular demo, I'm using Team Foundation Server. Because I find that it's typical or more typical that .NET developers are more comfortable with using Team Foundation Server. And the other tool that I'll be using today is, if I can get to it, is IBM Rational Build Forge, because our product Automatra Enterprise directly works with IBM Rational Build Forge. And to give you a little bit of foresight into what we're going to be doing is we're going to do two things in BuildForge. One is we're going to do continuous integration build. So that means at some interval, we're checking the source control system to see if there's been changes, and if so, we're going to create a new build. And then we're also going to use it for deployments. So when Automatra's configuration is ready, we'll be publishing automation to BuildForge for BuildForge to execute. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the developer, and I'll log in here. And I'll go to the console. And right now there's nothing running in BuildForge. Okay? If I go back into my source code, my developer is charged with some work item to actually edit the title of this particular web page. So this is a very basic web application that enables some file upload capability. Okay. So the latest checked-in version, what you can see is what I haven't edited yet. So once I start editing this, I'll just type in a small change and save it. I can go ahead and commit this to Team Foundation Server. All right. Oh, wow. Sorry to hear that. Okay. So I'm just putting in a comment and I'll check that in. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is switch over to Rational Build Forge. And what happens here is that we're running under continuous integration. And if you know just a little bit something about continuous integration, what happens, I think I mentioned it briefly before, is that it checks the source control system at some defined interval. Okay. And usually that interval isn't as aggressive as what I've put into build for. So right now what I'm doing is I'm checking that polling. I'm polling the source control system every 2 minutes. And most people in the most aggressive case will actually pull that every 15 minutes. Okay. So this should start any second now. Oh, there it goes. Now, it's actually running the adapter right now. And so it's checking for changes from the last time it was successfully built to the current date and time. Now, if this build, if it actually found no changes, what would happen is this particular build ID would completely disappear, because you don't want to be auto-incrementing your build IDs just for no reason. Then you'll have build gaps and all that kind of stuff. So it did find a change, the change that I just committed to TFS. and it's automatically constructing the workspace. It'll do some .NET compilation, and then it'll stage the resulting build into Automatra Enterprise. So Automatra Enterprise has a very basic package manager, which manages all the package types that I previously mentioned: file system, zip, and MSI. Okay, so the build completed successfully. If I go over to the bill of materials, what I'm able to do is look at the details of that particular commit. Okay, so that's what I just committed to the source control system. All right. Now, what I want to jump into really quick is, before we get into the deployment stuff, is I do have a test machine called Percival. And Percival is just a basic R2, 2008 R2 machine. And right now, IIS is running, but the application that I just built is not deployed, okay? So now what I have to do is prepare to get that application deployed. So I'm going to go into Automatra Enterprise. And so this is the Automatra Enterprise console. Like I mentioned in the talk so far, these are the areas that we cover: systems architecture, configuration management, environment management, and deployment management. Okay, so I'm going to go through, I'm going to be touching on all of these pieces. So when we talked about the systems architecture, we do have things split into systems, subsystems, and components. Okay, we also have this packages tab here, and this is called the design section. And in packages, what we have is package sets. Okay, and what a package set is basically these are all the packages that were built for this particular release. Okay, so what you'll find is this retail application file upload 1.0, what we just built, build 77, and it was, well, this is Australian Eastern Daylight Time, so it doesn't correlate to what we're looking at right now. But this is what we just built. If we hopped back over to BuildForge, what you'll actually see is that number correlates to this number. So we're auto-generating a build ID from BuildForge, labeling the source control system using that build ID, and we're also submitting that package. We're submitting that package to Automatra Enterprise with that ID. So we know exactly what build number it came from. And we know that since this is a file system type of package, there's 16 files that are composed within that package. Okay? Now, systems are very high level, so that's why you see things like client master, employee education, personal banking, and service management here. And the reason why we have a service management system there is we can organize very standard configurations across all applications. And I'll get into that more in a little bit. Then you have subsystems. And a subsystem is basically like a sub area. Oh, that one doesn't have one. Is a sub area of a system. So you're able to break them out into these different areas. And then a component is really where the beef of the configuration part of Automatra comes in. So you'll see things here like standard Win 2008 server, standard Windows 2008 R2 server, standard IIS 7.5 installation. And then this is the actual application that we're working with here, which is the new account form upload. Now, once we get into this particular configuration, there's a lot of new stuff here to see. The way that basic configuration is organized in Automatra is through classes. So each of these things that you see under here is a configuration class. Okay? And configuration classes should be seen as the configuration that you would ultimately want to see in production. Okay? So for this particular case, I have the basic installation stuff already done, and what you see under component are some inherited members as well. So I have a standard Windows 2008 R2 server, standard IIS configuration. So if you have standard IIS configuration all the way up to the site level, but now I have a web application. And in this web application, I have some required configuration and I have some optional configuration. And why those are optional is typically either the configuration is not required in order to IIS to function, or there are defaults already there in the configuration. So what we've done here is we built out in the back end an entire model that defines what all these attributes are and what their default values should be. So if you don't have it defined, then it will always apply that default configuration to the target system. So you know exactly for sure what you see in your configuration is what you get on your target deployment system. So I'm going to create a web application called file upload, and the path is going to be C file upload. And because this is a .NET 4.0 application, I need to change the default pool. So what you could do is if you have this as a standard, for example, if you have this as standard across your entire organization to use .NET 4.0, which you probably don't, you probably have a lot of legacy apps as well, you could actually set this as your site defaults, or you could enforce this configuration. So let's go ahead and update that. So that's turned green, and now I need to pick the package I want to deploy. So that's retail file application upload, and build 77 I want to deploy. Now it doesn't turn green right away, but now it will, because everything that's required in order to configure that package has been configured. Now what I need to do is deploy this application to Percival. But when I'm looking over here at the node assignment, I find that Percival isn't there. So I have to actually go and configure Percival before I can continue. And this is where we get into the environment management aspect of Automatra. So let's go over to environment management, and we'll go over to nodes so we can create a new node. So I'm going to add a node, and I'm just going to insert information for Percival now. Now, one thing that we also have in Automatra is role-based access control. Okay, so now what I have to do is say, well, which teams can actually use this particular node, or actually just see it. So I'll go ahead and create that, and now we see that Percival is listed in the dev environment, but it doesn't have any objects, which basically means that it's an empty piece of hardware. We don't have any configuration applied to it yet. So what I need to do now is go back over to design and do components and into new account form upload. And now Percival is here in the list. So I'm going to go ahead and update this node assignment. Now what's happened at this point is Percival is starting to consume instances of this configuration at this particular version level. And what that means is if I don't change Percival's configuration, then it'll automatically take the information that's configured here for my deployment. So let's go over and take a look at Percival. And what we see here now is it has all these objects, and objects are basically instances of those particular classes that were constructed as the class configuration. Now, by default, everything is uninstalled. But what I do know for this particular server is, just because it would take, the demo would take much longer otherwise, is these are already installed. Okay, so what the configuration at this time tells me is Percival is configured to take the to deploy the configuration that is defined within that particular component for file upload site app. So how do we go about getting the configuration from Automatra into BuildForge so we can execute that deployment? Well, what we do is that we go over to this icon here for publishing. And the interesting thing about publishing is that I can deploy things at the system, subsystem, or component levels. So if you think about those business application hierarchies, we can deploy whole business applications if we want to. We also can choose our design components. So if I change that to subsystem, I would get all the subsystems to check. So if I wanted to check everything in a new account, I would, but I just need to check the component and for new account form upload. And when I get candidates, it's going to show me what's actually going to happen on that target machine after I publish and run this configuration. So I'm going to publish this configuration. And now if I go back over to BuildForge, I'll see my new account form upload dev project, which actually represents what I want to deploy. So it depends on your particular process for deployment. For dev environments, you may want to run this deployment automatically. For other environments, it may need to be a scheduled change. But for us right now, we're just going to run it manually because we're in this particular case. So there's a couple of different ways that you can execute this by going into the project or just doing this quick start project. So I'm just going to click the quick start project and start the deployment. And when I do that, I can go down into jobs and I can see my deployment status. Now what's happening here is that you see some strange little icons here. What actually BuildForge has the capability to do is thread or do things in parallel within a particular automation project. And the way that Automatra leverages that feature with BuildForge is that we thread machine deployments. So if you need to deploy a package to 50 machines, we can organize that and do it all in parallel. So we'll just wait for this to finish. Now, if everything worked correctly, if I go back over to my tab in my browser, it'll just be a second, wait for this to complete. Okay, so if I go over here, if I click the refresh button, if everything worked fine, then we should have a website now. Okay, so and this is the change I actually made in the source control system. Now, why don't we see what happens the next time around? Because it's not like every single time that you do a deployment, you're doing everything from scratch, correct? These things happen very iteratively and very quickly. So why don't we go back over to my source control system here and just make another quick change. And I'm just going to commit this. Check in. Okay, and check that in. So if I go back over to BuildForge and I go to jobs, soon enough in the next minute, then another job will kick off. Something I wanted to out of the box. BuildForge has the capability of integrating with a lot of other source control systems like ClearCase, CVS, Jazz, Perforce, StarTeam, Subversion, Visual Source Safe. So And there are other integrators out there. So it also integrates with automated test systems as well. So if you have unit testing, or if you even have automated functional or performance testing that needs to be run after your build process or after your deployment process, you can handle that with BuildForge as well. So this build is complete, and this is going to be build 78. And it's just cleaning up the workspace now, but that should be fine to go into Automatra and take a look to see if my package actually got submitted. And you see I have 3 packages now, and my new package 78 is here. So what I want to do is just go and change that one package, because I want to deploy that new one again. Okay, so that's been updated. Now, the class configuration is now for that particular package version. Go ahead and update that install state. All right. Now what I'm going to do is go and publish that again. Now in the near future, a lot of these things that you say, oh wow, I have to change the package version, or oh wow, I have to do this publish again. We're actually in the next release going to be automating these things. So you have the capability to applying behaviors to this, so you can automatically consume and publish. So what you see here is that we're not creating the app again. We're not even touching the app again. Okay. What Automatra has the capability of doing, which I a little bit glossed over because of the background polling threshold, is that it can tell when a class is changed, and it can tell when individual attributes of classes change. So for example, if you need to change the application pool on IIS for a particular web application from 3.5 to 4.0, it's not going to go and recreate that web application again. And it's not going to go and reset all the attributes on that web application. It's going to know that just that one attribute has changed. Okay, so it's actually touching as little as absolute possible on the target systems. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this configuration, and then go back into BuildForge. And something that you're going to see a little bit different for this project now, I'm just going to show you a little different way of executing it. Is that it only has one step in it instead of 2. Well, 2 steps that are actually doing work. So it's not running through the whole gamut of things to configure. Once again, it's just doing that one package and putting the code in its place. All right, so that completed. So if I go over to Percival now and I click refresh, now I have my change. So that's what I changed in the source control system. So in a nutshell, that's a very basic introduction into how all the areas of Automatra function. And of course, there are more advanced scenarios which I'm sure that are applicable to your environment. And but this should give you an idea of the overall capabilities that it has. So, do we have any questions?